My name is Teresa Grimes. This is a story that has been on my mind for 60-some years now. It is about my sisters, Barbara and Petey.
Three innocent souls, Robert Peterson, John Schussler, and his younger brother Anton Schussler, met a tragic and gruesome fate that sent shivers down the spines of an entire community. Their naked bodies were discovered in a desolate ditch, abandoned and lifeless. The autumn wind whispered secrets as the sun dipped below the horizon on that fateful October day in 1955. Little did the world know that the events unfolding in a seemingly serene town would leave an indelible mark on history forever, altering the lives of those touched by its dark shadow. As the news of the heinous crime spread like wildfire, shock and disbelief gripped the hearts of everyone who heard of it. Who could perpetrate such an unthinkable act upon two naive boys? The questions swirled like leaves caught in a restless gust, but answers remained unclear. Hi, and welcome back to Cold Case Diaries. If you are new here, please consider subscribing, as it helps us motivate to create more intriguing content for you. Let's have a look at the most chilling case you've ever heard, the case of Kennrth Hasen. In the 1950s, a peaceful and safe community thrived in Chicago's northwest side, where people sought refuge from the city's chaos. The neighborhood was known for its church, little league, and bowling hall, which brought the community together like a close-knit family. It was an ideal place for raising children, with the city's lowest crime rate providing reassurance to families. However, in 1955, a dreadful event shook this tranquil town. The story began with three young friends, Robert Bobby Peterson, who was very responsible and organized, John Schussler, who loved sports and was always well-behaved, and John's younger brother, Anton John Schussler, also known as Tony, who dreamed of becoming a veterinarian. Together, they had many exciting adventures and shared a strong bond of friendship. One autumn day, as the sun set on their childhood playground, something dark and dangerous seemed to loom on the horizon. On October 16, 1955, John and Anton rode their bikes to their friend Robert's house. They each had $1.25 and a daring plan to sneak downtown and watch a movie. Even though the boys were not allowed to go on this dangerous trip, their 14-year-old friend Robert, who was seen as an expert, got permission to join them. Together, they went to the Loop Theater to watch The African Lion by Walt Disney. With $1.50 in his hand, Robert bid farewell to his parents, promising to be back by 8 o'clock. Little did anyone know that this seemingly innocent outing would soon lead to a chilling mystery, leaving the families and the entire neighborhood engulfed in uncertainty and fear. As the night wore on and the clock struck 8, worry crept into the hearts of both families. The boys were nowhere to be seen and no calls came in. Anton, John, and their mom, Eleanor, reached out to the Petersons, seeking news of their children's whereabouts. Dorothy, Robert's mother, surprised Eleanor by revealing that the boys had gone downtown. But as the hours passed and the boys failed to contact anyone, Dorothy grew increasingly anxious, prompting her to call the police at Gale Street Station around 10 p.m. Sergeant Petts advised them to call back if the boys didn't return within an hour. The skies, once a serene blue, darkened as the day progressed, turning stormy and unleashing heavy rain upon the neighborhood. Concern grew among the residents, but Mr. Peterson and Mr. Schussler refused to give up the search for their beloved boys. They scoured every burger place on Milwaukee Avenue and even checked the Loop Theater, the destination for the boys' movie outing. However, their efforts yielded no results, and it was as if the boys had vanished without a trace. Feeling like there was no other choice, the families decided to involve the police. Strangely, despite their children attending the same school and being friends, the Petersons and Schusslers had never truly connected before. Their lives seemed to run parallel, never crossing paths until this fateful event. Little did they know that the bonds between them were about to be woven in ways they could never have imagined. As the authorities commenced the search for the missing boys, they questioned the parents about their clothes and belongings, hoping to find any possible leads. It was discovered that Robert wore a White Sox jacket, while John and Anton donned Cubs jackets. The mystery of their disappearance deepened. With downtown being an hour's drive away, it seemed unlikely that they had gone so far. Speculations arose, suggesting they might have spent their money on snacks and were walking home in the rain, or perhaps indulging in a favorite pastime, bowling. The morning of October 17, 1955, brought with it an even greater sense of unease, both among the families and the police. It was unprecedented for a missing child not to be found in this area. Robert, known for his responsible nature, would never have left John and Anton alone, making their disappearance all the more puzzling. The detectives decided to look into Farnsworth School on Linder Avenue, wondering if the school had any connection to this bewildering turn of events. Principal D.D. Thornton suggested that they check the north branch of the Chicago River in the Forest Preserve because it was a place where violence had happened in the past. A year before the boys went missing, a high school boy attacked a fifth grader near the river. Mrs. Bernice Jonas and Miss Cecilia Schwachten, who taught the boys, were upset and tried to keep their cool. Mrs. Jonas thought that in the last few days, one or two guys might have been trying to get the attention of the students. Some students said that the community was full of fear, and the agents knew that if they did not find the boys soon, rumors and speculations would make it hard to figure out what happened. With 60,000 people in the area, the officers had their work cut out for them. They had to ring a lot of doorbells and cover a large area. They knew they had to cut down the number of places they were looking to increase their chances of success. So they started by looking at the Loop Theater and calling the bus drivers who were working the day the boys went missing. One driver, Bruno Mansorini, had an important lead. He remembered seeing the boys, who looked like Robert, John, and Anton, get on his bus at Berto Avenue and show student ID cards. They were going to bowl at the Jefferson Park recreation alleys, so he dropped them off on Lawrence Avenue. The trouble was that they had not asked for a transfer slip, which meant they should have gotten off at Central, near the Peterson home. Maybe that simple change in plans set off a terrifying chain of events. It seemed like the police were finally making some headway in their search for the boys who had gone missing. Sightings at the bowling alley gave the next important piece of information. Neighbors and family members of the boys said they had seen Robert and Anton at Monte Cristo Bowling Alley. They were going to the bathroom while John was talking to a neighbor. After Robert and Anton came back from the bathroom at 8 o'clock, the boys left. Edward C. Davis, the manager of the bowling hall, added to the mix by saying that the boys had been there twice that day, once at 3:15 p.m. and again at 7 p.m. Because they did not have enough money, they had not gone bowling. It made people wonder how three young boys ended up back at the same place just hours after being turned away. Why would they come back if they did not have any cash to bowl? Now that the detectives had a schedule, it was up to them to put the rest of the puzzle together. But they still did not know everything about what had happened. Knowing that they were so close to the boys but still could not find them was upsetting. On October 18, 1955, Russell Corcoran, captain of the 33rd Precinct of the Chicago Police Department, was working in a tense and busy office. The lost Peterson and Schussler boys had taken over the whole department, and the captain had just told the commissioner that they were doing everything they could to find them. But at 1:15, the phone rang again, and when the captain picked it up, he thought it was just another normal call. But as he listened, his face turned pale and tears came to his eyes. After the captain hung up the phone, he said something terrible that would haunt the police team for the rest of their lives. 3 young boys' bodies were found with nothing on them. Victor Livingston, a middle-aged liquor seller, was driving around in his car and enjoying the results of his hard work. He had made a lot of money and wanted to have lunch somewhere quiet. So he got in his car and drove to Robinson Woods Forest Preserve, a beautiful place on the northwest side of Chicago where people go to see birds and fall colors. But he had no idea that he was about to find something very scary. As he was about to eat, he was sitting in his car when he saw a person lying still on the ground. He drove away quickly to find a phone so he could call the cops. Since the bodies were dumped in a ditch that was 2 feet deep, only one could be seen. The detectives looked everywhere for the lost boys, but what they found was much scarier than anyone could have expected. Just 2 weeks before Halloween, the boys were found naked and piled on top of each other. Robert's head had a horrible wound that had been there for a long time and had healed. Even worse, the area was already dirty, so there was no chance of finding tracks or anything else that could help. 3 boys were found dead in the Robinson Woods Forest Preserve. An autopsy showed that they had been dead for at least 36 to 40 hours before they were found. At first, people thought that the boys had been hurt, but the autopsy proved that was not the case. But Dr. Harry R. Hoffman, who works at the Cook County Behavior Clinic, said grimly that the person who did such a terrible thing was probably satisfying their needs by doing it. Dr. Jerry Kearns was an expert at looking at dead bodies, but he did not bring the seriousness of his job with him. The story of the Schussler-Peterson boys, on the other hand, would be hard to forget. Anton Jr. had gotten a karate chop to the neck. Fingernail marks on Anton and John's necks, on the other hand, showed that they had been choked. The Schussler boys seemed to have been choked with their bare hands, but it looked like a rope was used to strangle Robert. He had also been hit in the head 14 times with what looked like a rake or a farming tool. The other boys had been hit in the face with what looked like the flat side of a knife. Coroner Walter E. McCarrow also had something to say about the tragedy. He said that it was the work of a madman and possibly a group of older boys. It was said that Robert, John, and Anton were probably held captive in a dirty place, bound and tied with strips of tape, and then dumped in a forest preserve. Dr. Kearns knew this was not a normal case. The killer struck from the left back, and even though it looked like a terrible crime, there was no sign of an attack. Robert had to fight for his life, and his head wounds showed that he had. Even a witness said the car was a Packard, which led police to talk to almost 1,000 people who owned Packards. Even after a long investigation in which more than 43,000 people were questioned, the killer could not be found. Anton Schussler Sr., who had just lost his 2 sons, spoke out about the tragedy. He expressed concern that when children couldn't go to the movies in the afternoon and return home safely, something was wrong with the country. But the Schussler family's bad luck was not over yet. Anton Sr. died of a heart attack just 1 month after the killings. He was only 41 years old. Eleanor Schussler's life became even lonelier than it had been before. Both of her sons and her husband had died. She married Valentine Bud Kujawa as time went on and tried to move on with her life. But she never forgot about the killings. She always had a photo of the boys and their bronzed baby shoes on her dresser to remember her of the children she would lose. She lived for decades with the haunting question of what had happened to her boys, and when detectives came to visit, it was a painful reminder of the unsolved case. Gary Kujawa, who is her stepson, remembers how much the murders hurt her and said that she always thought about the tragedy. The Peterson family also had trouble getting through their grief. Malcolm lost both his son and his best friend at the same time. The tragedy made Dorothy, Robert's mother, so weak that she needed medical care. In the months after the killings, Chicago was a strange place. Officers searched the streets for hours, looking for any sign of proof or even a piece of the boys' clothes. Parents were afraid to let their kids out of their sight for fear that the unknown attackers would also hurt them. Now, they could not even imagine leaving their kids at home alone. Doors were locked tight, and putting things in the trash seemed like a risky move because anything suspicious could lead to a lot of questioning by the cops who were looking into it. Terror had spread to every part of life, leaving the town paralyzed with fear. Even though there was a lot of chaos, the investigation continued with hundreds of uniformed police officers and investigators in plain clothes going through the neighborhood. Captain Louis Caparelli called in an extra 200 cops from his team, and all of them gave up their weekend plans to help find the person. One police officer in the Chicago Police Department remarked that they had never witnessed anything like it before. But it was not until December 7, 1955, that the Chicago Daily News paid attention to some strange marks on John's left thigh, halfway between his knees and hip. The marks were circular and 4 inches by 2 inches. They were made on the fatty layer of tissue under the skin in the shape of a pattern of stars and letters. The word bear stood out the most because Dr. Kearns had missed this point in his early research. The workers at the funeral home found shocking bone breaks in the Schussler boys that Dr. Kearns had missed. Another important piece of evidence was that the boys' faces had been covered with tape, but they had been taken off before the bodies were put in the ditch. Coroner McCarran said that the people who did this crime knew what they were doing. They were careful to take off the tape that had been used to bind and mute the victims because it might have had fingerprints on it. The leads that seemed so hopeful at first slowly went away, and the once busy investigation turned into a quiet, unmoving cold case. The brutal killings of 3 young boys in Chicago left detectives with more questions than answers. On Friday, December 28, 1956, 2 teenage girls, Barbara Grimes and Patricia Grimes, went missing after watching their favorite movie, Love Me Tender. They left the house around 6:30 p.m. This was another tragedy. They would take a bus to get to the movie house, which was down Archer Avenue. So they went to the Brighton Theater to see Elvis Presley's Love Me Tender. Their bodies were found naked on the side of the road, just like the bodies of the other people who had been killed. But unlike with the boys, there was no clear reason why she died. The coroner's jury decided that the girls died because they got too cold. According to the coroner, the official cause of death was simply secondary shock from the cold. They were not in a normal position, like 2 people who had frozen to death and just fell asleep. But the main detective, Harry Gloss, did not agree. He thought that the fact that there was ice around the bodies showed that they were warm when they were left there, and that Patricia's chest wounds showed that she had been hurt before she died. He also thought Barbara had been hurt, which the doctors had said was not the case. People thought that the same person might have been behind both crimes because of how alike they were. It seemed like the murders of the boys in Chicago would stay a mystery forever. But then, in 1994, a bombshell fell, and it was not the kind of proof you see on TV crime shows. There was no DNA, no fingerprints, and no new proof that a forensics expert could find. Instead, it was a tip from a snitch in an investigation that had nothing to do with this case that suddenly led directly to a suspect in this long-dormant case. On February 17, 1977, when Special Agent Jim Grady and his partner, Mr. Retuno, started putting together clues from the horse racing industry, they made a big step forward in the case of the missing Candy Erickson and horsewoman Helen Voorhees Brock. They thought they knew who killed the horses and took Candy and Helen. They knew they were going into a place where there were secrets. As the parts of the puzzle started to fit together, the prosecution team found itself in a world of murderers, arsonists, swindlers, and con artists. As they dug deeper, they started hearing rumors that a guy named Kenneth Hasen had something to do with the boys' deaths. Hasen had told his close friends and family about the event. Pieces of information from this dark world were used to build the case many years. Somehow, they were able to make it all fit together, giving a clear picture of what had happened all those years ago. By the beginning of the 1990s, police were getting closer and closer to Kenneth Hasen. Kenneth Hasen was born in 1933 to Ethan and Lucille Hasen. His life was full of ups and downs. As a kid, he was known for being smart and charming. He later married his high school sweetheart, Beverly Ray Carlson, and had 2 sons, Danny and Mark. In the 1960s, he opened and ran a horse stable called Camelot near Tinley Park. Roger Spree moved into the Hasen house when he was 11 or 12 years old. He was a young worker at Hasen's riding stable. Friends of Spree's have said that Hasen was like a father to him, but that figure of a father would soon be shown to be something much worse. On March 29, 1994, Special Agent Jim Grady and his team, which included Mr. Retuno, confronted Kenneth Hasen with the proof against him. Hasen was 60 years old at the time, and as they laid out the case, he felt like the walls were closing in. Hasen decided to take a polygraph test as a way to work together, but Hasen died before the test could be done because he had a heart attack. He finally seemed to be getting what he deserved, but it was a bittersweet win. Even though Hasen did not say he did it, there was a lot of proof against him. People had come forward to say that Hasen was with the boys on the day they disappeared. The most likely person who killed Robert Peterson, John Schussler, and Anton Schussler was Kenneth Hasen. His death ended the investigation, and the case was formally over. But there were still some questions and doubts. Was Kenneth Hasen responsible for these brutal killings, or was there something else going on? The fact that Hasen died before he went to trial or confessed makes it hard to know what happened. Even so, the case is still one of the most disturbing and sad unanswered crimes in Chicago's history. Robert Peterson, John Schussler and Anton Schussler's families will always feel sad about losing their loved ones, and the rest of the community will always remember how dark their neighborhood became in 1955. What do you think of this case? Let us know in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that subscribe button before you go. Thanks for watching.